The city hung in the clouds like an ornament suspended from invisible threads, its foundations hidden in the rolling amber mists of the gas giant below. Hovercraft hummed along glowing lanes, neon adverts flickered between skyscrapers, and voices from dozens of species blended into one symphony of haggling, laughter, and the occasional drunken song about space whales. Somewhere in that noise, walking with his head tilted up like a tourist who still hadn't learned not to look impressed, a human man wove through the crowd. He was there for one simple task: sell spare parts salvaged from a derelict freighter, and buy himself enough fuel to get off this floating circus before someone tried to sell him either a genuine time machine or a pet slug that claimed to predict the stock market. He didn't plan on witnessing a public execution. The crowd gathered at the plaza's center, where a raised platform pulsed with blue light. Curious, he followed. At first, he thought it was some kind of performance. That impression lasted right until the announcer, a tall, insected figure whose voice buzzed like a frying cable, declared the charges in booming tones, translated into half a dozen languages by hovering drones. Crimes against the state, treason, dissemination of forbidden truths. The man almost left then. Governments had a funny way of defining truths. But then he saw her. The prisoner was led forward, hands bound by magnetic cuffs. She looked at first glance like any human woman, dark hair tangled from confinement, face pale under the harsh lights, posture stiff with exhaustion. But her ears betrayed her. Long and tapering like a sculptor's ideal of an elf, they peeked through her hair as if they had been designed to catch secrets from the wind. There was dignity in the way she held her head, even with the crowd jeering. Something about her expression, a blend of resignation and quiet fury, tightened a knot in his chest. He had no business caring. He didn't even know her name, and yet he found himself unable to move, as though his boots had fused to the pavement. The executioner, a thick-armed guard with a face that suggested too many collisions with blunt objects, raised a weapon that glowed at the tip. The sentence was about to be carried out, and the human did something very stupid. "Hey!" he shouted, surprising himself as much as anyone else. His voice cracked, half because of nerves and half because he'd been drinking something earlier described as fermented lightning. The crowd turned, mutters of confusion rippling. "Yeah, is this some kind of play? Because if it is, I've got to say, the acting's a bit stiff." The guard frowned. "Outsider, move along." "I would," the man said, forcing a grin. "But you know, I've seen better execution performances on second-rate space cruises. And believe me, those were bad. I mean, the props department didn't even get the fake laser beams right. At least try harder." A few scattered laughs rose from the crowd. The guard bristled, clearly unused to being the butt of a joke. The distraction was tiny but enough. His mind raced. He didn't know why he was doing this, only that he couldn't watch her die. When the guard turned back toward him with a snarl, he lunged, not at the guard but at the ceremonial statue behind him. The massive structure, depicting some long-forgotten emperor in heroic pose, wobbled precariously when he threw his weight against it. It toppled with a groan, crashing into the platform in a spectacle of shattering stone and sparks. The crowd gasped, then shrieked as chunks of marble rained down. In the chaos, he scrambled toward the prisoner. Hi," he said breathlessly while fumbling with the cuffs. "I'm either rescuing you or committing the dumbest crime of my life." "Maybe both." She blinked at him, confusion flickering across her sharp, tired eyes. "You are insane." "Yeah, people keep telling me that," he muttered. He pulled a tool from his belt, something between a screwdriver and a laser scalpel, and with a few frantic sparks, the cuffs clattered to the ground. The guard roared and lunged, but the alien woman was already moving. With surprising strength, she seized the weapon from the nearest soldier and discharged it at the ground, sending a shockwave that knocked everyone flat. She didn't even look winded. "Come," she snapped as if she'd been planning this escape herself. "Sure," he said, stumbling after her. "Just lead the way, Alfiers." Her glare could have melted ice. "Do not call me that." They darted through the panicked mob, ducking under holographic banners and leaping over toppled kiosks. He spotted an unattended hoverbike near the plaza's edge, sleek, black, and almost certainly stolen property. Perfect. He hopped on, fumbling with the controls, while she slid in behind him with an exasperated sigh. "You do not even know how to pilot this, do you?" "Of course I do," he lied, pressing the ignition. The bike shot forward with enough acceleration to nearly throw them both off. He yelped, swerving wildly, narrowly avoiding a fruit stand. Melon-like spheres exploded across the pavement, spraying sticky juice over pedestrians. "Left." She barked, "I know." He cried, turning right. The bike spun, clipped a lamppost, and sent them hurtling down a side alley. Drones zipped overhead, sirens howled in the distance, and the smell of fried circuitry filled the air. They crashed through hanging laundry lines, scattering glowing garments onto the bike's nose. One stuck to his face, and he clawed it off with a growl. "Why does alien underwear glow?" "It charges on sunlight," she answered flatly. "Of course it does." By some miracle, they broke free of the pursuing guards and roared into the lower districts, where the neon lights flickered and the air smelled of rust and oil. He slowed only when his arms ached from clinging to the handlebars. Behind him, she finally exhaled, her chest rising and falling as though she had only now allowed herself to breathe. "You should not have done that," she said quietly. "Yeah, well," he said, trying to catch his breath. "I'm not great at watching innocent people get zapped. Kind of ruins my day." Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "You have made yourself an enemy of my government. They will not stop hunting you." He smirked despite the sweat dripping down his forehead. "Guess I'll have to get used to their hospitality. Though for the record, if we survive this, you owe me a drink. Minimum." She studied him as though deciding whether he was brave or just very, very stupid. Perhaps both. Finally, she turned her eyes back to the alley ahead, her voice calm but resolute. "Very well, human. For now, we run." And as the bike sped deeper into the labyrinth of the floating city, the man couldn't help but think that he had just signed up for the kind of trouble you only read about in cheap pulp novels. The kind where the hero usually dies in the second chapter. He hoped he'd make it at least to the third. The docking bay smelled like burnt copper and wet carpet, which, as far as he was concerned, summed up most space stations. He had been wandering the station for an hour, searching for a mechanic who wouldn't rob him blind, when he stumbled into a tavern that seemed determined to pretend it wasn't one. It called itself the Galactic Embassy of Culinary Diplomacy, which was a fancy way of saying they sold soup and strong liquor to anyone who could pay. Inside, a choir of mismatched species shouted at one another over the screech of a jukebox that appeared to be actively trying to murder the concept of music. A three-eyed bartender stirred something that smoked as it hissed, and two miners argued about whether asteroid drilling was more dangerous than dating someone who collected antique plasma grenades. He sat down at a table that looked as though it had been rescued from a junkyard, ordered something with too many syllables to be trustworthy, and immediately regretted it when the cup arrived glowing faintly green. "You will not survive that," said a voice across from him. He looked up. Sitting opposite was a woman with long, tapering ears, her posture relaxed but her eyes watching him like a hawk sizing up prey. She had no business looking so calm in a place where everyone smelled faintly of engine coolant, but she pulled it off as though the chaos were nothing more than background noise. "I've survived worse," he said, eyeing the drink. "You think a digestive system, designed for bread and cow milk, can handle sporfure nectar. I was raised on cafeteria food," he shot back. "If that didn't kill me, this won't." He took a sip. It tasted like someone had distilled regret, added chili powder, and then set it on fire. His face turned the shade of overripe tomatoes. He coughed until he saw stars. "I stand corrected," she said dryly, sipping from her own glass. "Glad you're enjoying yourself," he rasped, eyes watering. They fell into silence for a beat, the din of the tavern swallowing them. He wanted to ask what she was doing here, how she had found him, or why she looked like she belonged anywhere, while he perpetually looked like someone who had lost a bet. Instead, she spoke first. "You need work." He raised an eyebrow. The cargo bay stretched before them, stacked with crates taller than houses. She tapped her wrist device, scanning until one container lit up with a faint outline. "There." He squinted at the towering crate. "How do we move that? We don't exactly have a forklift." She pressed a button. The crate shrank, folding in on itself until it was the size of a lunchbox. "Oh, that's handy." "It is technology. You should try it sometime." He resisted the urge to stick out his tongue. They grabbed the miniature crate and turned to leave. Of course, that was when the alarm went off. Red lights flared. Klaxons wailed. A robotic voice announced, "Intruders detected. Please remain still while you are vaporized." "Please," he said, sprinting after her as boots thundered in the distance. "At least they're polite." Blaster fire sizzled past, scorching the walls. He ducked, nearly tripping over his own feet. They bolted through the corridors, weaving between cover, until they burst out onto the docking ring. Their stolen getaway vehicle, a cargo skimmer he'd hot-wired earlier, looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. Its engine sputtered like an asthmatic donkey, but when he slammed the ignition, it roared to life with all the enthusiasm of a dying lawnmower. "Get in!" he yelled. She leapt aboard, clutching the crate, as Dominion guards poured onto the ring behind them. The skimmer jolted forward, rattling so hard his teeth clicked together. He swerved wildly to avoid laser blasts, at one point nearly smashing into a noodle cart. The vendor shook a fist and shouted something about unpaid tabs. "Faster!" She shouted. "It doesn't do faster," he shouted back. "It barely does moving." Somehow they made it. The skimmer skidded into a maintenance bay where his ship waited, held together by hope, tape, and spite. They scrambled aboard, slammed the hatch shut, and launched into the void as Dominion fighters scrambled in pursuit. The ship shook like a tin can in a storm, but the jump drive spat to life. Stars stretched, bent, and then collapsed into the comforting darkness of hyperspace. Silence fell in the cockpit, broken only by the wheeze of the ship's ancient systems. He slumped in the pilot's chair, sweat dripping down his temple. "So," he panted, "next time you offer me a job, can it maybe involve fewer homicidal soldiers?" She set the crate down, her lips twitching almost into a smile. "No promises." He stared at her ears, catching the glow of the console lights, and despite himself, he laughed. "Figures." And the ship carried them deeper into the unknown, with a stolen secret humming quietly between them and trouble never far behind. The marketplace was alive in ways that felt slightly illegal, but only in the sort of way you could never quite prove. Stalls glowed with signs that shifted languages mid-sentence, hawking everything from genetically improved oranges to slightly haunted cutlery. Creatures of all shapes moved shoulder to shoulder, their voices merging into a noise so dense it felt like weather. He kept one hand on his jacket pocket, because if there was anywhere he was going to lose his last 2-credit chits, it was here. Beside him, she walked as though the chaos parted for her. She didn't look left or right, didn't slow at the promises of miracle tonics or the occasional offer of authentic Earth hot dogs, which, judging by the color, weren't authentic to any Earth he knew. Her ears caught the glow of hanging lanterns, twitching slightly at the sharp whistles of traders calling out to customers. She carried herself like someone who didn't just belong here, someone who owned the place. He, however, did not. "Do people always stare?" he whispered. "They are not staring at you," she said flatly. "Oh, good. For a second I thought I was getting popular. They are staring because you are the only human in this sector." "Right," he muttered. "So I am popular, just not in the way I'd like." Their destination was buried near the end of the market's spiral. A narrow stair led down to a basement-level hall, its entrance disguised as a stall selling questionable incense. The scent was so strong he was pretty sure it had singed his eyebrows. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a room lit by floating orbs that pulsed in sync with the hum of old machinery. Around a table sat 4 figures, each stranger than the last. A reptilian merchant with scales polished to a shine, a thin android whose faceplate flickered between borrowed expressions, a furry creature no larger than a backpack with 6 arms and a deep smoker's cough, and a woman who looked entirely ordinary until her shadow moved in the wrong direction. The woman with the ears greeted them with a nod and slid into a chair. He sat beside her, trying to look like someone who belonged at a clandestine meeting. Instead, he looked like someone who had stumbled in looking for a bathroom. The reptilian merchant hissed softly, "You are late." She replied smoothly, "Better late than dead." The merchant's tongue flicked in irritation, but the android cut in with a buzz of static. "Discussion, cargo redistribution, agenda." "Translation," he muttered to her, "they're here to talk about stealing stuff." "Your powers of deduction are unmatched," she murmured back without moving her lips. The small furry creature coughed violently, then slammed a paw on the table. "Less talking, more paying, you bring human, yes. Useful, maybe." The shadows in the corner flickered unnaturally as the last woman spoke, her voice low and amused. "He looks fragile." "Thanks," he said. "That's exactly the confidence boost I needed today." The meeting spiraled into arguments, trade terms, and hushed threats that somehow sounded polite when said by people who regularly smuggled weapons. He understood about half of it, which was better than usual. Mostly he caught phrases like supply routes, encrypted codes, and don't let the Dominion find out or we'll all be vaporized. Eventually, the merchant slammed a data crystal on the table. "Job is simple. Secure this. Deliver to contact on Caldrith 7. Payment is 20,000 credits." He perked up. 20,000. That was more than enough to fix his ship, buy decent boots, maybe even a cup of coffee that didn't taste like recycled dishwater. "Not simple," she corrected, tapping the crystal. "Dominion patrols, illegal checkpoints, spies everywhere." The android whirred. "Risk, compensation adequate." The furry one coughed so hard he nearly fell over. "Adequate? Try surviving a Dominion scan with this thing in your cargo hold. It screams contraband." "Better than screaming human," he muttered, then immediately wished he hadn't said it. Every head turned. He gave a weak smile. "Kidding, sort of." The meeting dissolved after agreements were made. The crystal was passed to her and the group vanished back into the market shadows, leaving the two of them alone in the orb-lit room. He whistled. 20,000 credits, that's a lot of noodles." "Do not think of noodles," she said, pocketing the crystal. "Think of survival." "I can think of both," he said. "I'm very talented." They slipped back into the market above, blending with the crowd. But blending wasn't his strong suit. While she moved gracefully, he found himself tripping over a tail here, bumping into a glowing jelly creature there. One vendor shouted at him for knocking over a stack of officially genuine meteor rocks. He apologized so many times he lost count. By the time they reached the docking bay, he was convinced everyone on the station knew his face, his shoe size, and his lack of coordination. Their ship waited, still wheezing from the last escape but upright. As they boarded, he asked, "So what's actually in this crystal?" She glanced at him, eyes sharp. "Information, enough to topple governments." He swallowed. "Cool, cool. And here I was hoping it was coupons." She ignored that. "Once we leave, the Dominion will pursue us. We cannot return." He paused at the hatch, suddenly aware of the weight of what they carried. A data crystal humming with secrets. A job that could get them rich, or very, very dead. And a companion who always seemed 3 steps ahead while he was still tying his metaphorical shoelaces. "Well," he said finally, forcing a grin, "if we're running forever, at least I've got decent company. And a ship that only explodes sometimes." She tilted her head, ears catching the ship's interior lights, and for just a flicker of a moment her lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. He felt oddly proud of himself. The engines coughed, groaned, and then roared to life. The ship peeled away from the station, stars stretching into streaks as hyperspace swallowed them. He sank into the pilot's chair, already imagining 20,000 credits, a rebuilt ship, and maybe, just maybe, a future where running didn't always mean running from something. Of course, he knew better. Trouble had a way of finding him, especially now that Trouble had long ears and eyes that saw through every one of his half-baked jokes. He just hoped, this time, Trouble would also stick around. The ship drifted in the quiet after hyperspace like a man waking from a bad dream. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The hum of the engines filled the silence, along with the occasional wheeze from a coolant valve that should have been replaced 2 governments ago. He sat slouched in the pilot's chair, staring out at the field of stars ahead, and tried to convince himself that everything was going according to plan. It was. The data crystal sat in her hands, its faint glow casting patterns across her face. She hadn't taken her eyes off it since they jumped away from the station. He half expected her to start whispering to it like it was an old friend. Finally, he said, "You know, if you stare at it long enough, it might hatch. Then you'll have to feed it 3 times a day, and explain the birds and the bees, or whatever glowing data crystals like to hear about." Her ears twitched, but her expression didn't change. "This is more dangerous than you seem to understand." "Yeah, you've mentioned that. Governments toppling, revolutions, bounty hunters, the usual Tuesday." He leaned back, stretching his arms until something in his shoulder popped. "But you know what I see. 20,000 credits. That's enough to fix the ship, buy real coffee, maybe even brace yourself, new socks." Her gaze lifted, sharp as ever. "You joke because you are afraid." He smirked. "I joke because if I don't, I'll think too hard and realize I'm in way over my head. Which, by the way, I am." She tilted her head slightly, as if measuring him against the man who had stumbled into her execution weeks ago. "You are not the same fool who shouted at the guards." "Sure I am, just with more bruises now." "No," she said firmly. "You chose this path, not because you wanted credits, because you could have walked away many times and yet you did not." He opened his mouth to argue, then shut it. She was right, annoyingly enough. At the noodle vendor, at the smugglers' meeting, at the cargo heist, every fork in the road had been another chance to bail, and every time he stayed. Somewhere between one bad decision and the next, her fight had become his. He scratched his jaw, pretending to think very hard. "Well, don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to maintain. Hopeless coward has a nice ring to it." She shook her head, but the faintest hint of a smile brushed her lips before she looked back at the crystal. The ship jolted suddenly, knocking his mug of recycled water coffee across the console. "Ah, great. The universe heard us having a moment." He tapped the display. 3 Dominion ships had appeared on their scanners, blocking the route forward. "Interceptors," she said grimly. "They have tracked us." "Of course they have. They probably have a whole department dedicated to ruining my day." He punched the controls, pulling the ship into a hard turn. Lasers streaked across the void, one grazing their shields. The hull shuddered like an old man trying to get out of bed. She strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat, fingers dancing across her console. "If they capture us, the crystal will be lost. We must not let that happen." "I was hoping